And welcome, and of course, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kitshanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu La'asok B'divrei Torah. So
Amen.
what? Thank you. So what we're going to start off today is actually a bit of grammar. Rashi's been doing that quite a bit lately, and so once again, he's going to give us some introductory material regarding Hebrew grammar. I'm going to throw up the text onto the screen. Here goes, and we'll take a look at what he has to say. There are some really, I think, uh, one of the, like, I don't know if it was David Kimchi, Shirabeth, maybe you know, but there was a period of time, especially during the Spanish Golden Age, when there was major work done in terms of analysis of Hebrew and Hebrew grammar, and we're getting the benefit of some of it. But I would say that if anyone wants to study text Hebrew seriously, a basic course in Hebrew grammar is very helpful. At any rate, as I said, there were some basic issues that when you know those fundamentals, a lot of it starts to just fit into place. And I'm pretty much in awe of the people who did this analysis and were able to figure out these things. At any rate, back into the story itself, right? At this point, Pharaoh's daughter has adopted Moses, Vayigdal Hayeled. So this is actually, he is still with his mother at this point, but the child grew, Vatavi Ehu Levat Paro, and she brought him, that is, of course, Moses' mother, brought him to the daughter of Pharaoh. Vaihi la Levin, and again, basically this is saying she adopted him. He was to her as a son. Vatikra Shmo Moshe, she called him by the name of Moses, Vatomer saying, Kimin Hamayim Mishitihu, for I drew him from the water. And I think we were riffing a little bit on the significance here, that water has so much significance, both symbolically and realistically in our lives. But I'm wondering if there is, in a way, a throwback. I didn't say this quite so explicitly yesterday, but as I'm processing this, when we think about water, one of the big water stories in the Bible, of course, is Noah's flood, right? And the idea of being drawn from the water has possibly that connotation, that we could see water as a symbol of our lives, of physical reality, of the fact that we can drown in it, we can drown in our lives, and somehow not drowning. That this was actually what Torah does, is try to rescue us from drowning in our lives, and that there's something in his name. And of course, we also know that Moses himself was punished in connection with water. Interestingly enough, some
Well,
literary
you know, you
irony
did
there.
say, and I think this is relation to the flood, that water
Yes,
can mean judgment,
yes,
and if
exactly.
water is symbolic of Torah, it
Hmm.
kind of perhaps suggests a dichotomy of using, you either have Torah or judgment. I mean,
Hmm.
obviously judgment, you can be judged good as well, but if you know what
Right,
I mean, because being punished by a flood is
right.
not a good judgment. So I'm
No,
just suggesting that dichotomy of Torah or flood,
right.
doing what's right versus getting judged and punished.
Right. So I do want to say to you that there's a very wonderful theological concept of why we say God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, Elohe, and we don't say Adonai Avraham, Adonai Yitzchak, Adonai Yaakov. Why do we use the term Elohim? This is, by the way, one of the loveliest teachings I ever came across, and the idea is that, this goes back to some of the other issues that we talked about regarding the survival of the world given its imperfections. Um, and that ideally it would be wonderful if the world could live according to a strict justice, and that the idea of being rewarded in a just kind of way, and the idea that both that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob all their belief in God was such that they tried to live their lives not so much with the idea of God's mercy, but with the idea of God's justice, that they would still be worthy even if they lived in a reality that was strict, that involved strict justice, and that in many ways Judaism as a religion tries to make that assumption and try to lead us in a life where we aren't constantly seeking grace, but that we are getting deserved reward, and is something actually very, very powerful and lovely when you ever experience a just reward. Something, a reward that rather than associating punishment and justice, although, Lauren, you're absolutely right, generally speaking, unless it's somehow defined and clarified, justice usually involves punishment of some kind. But the idea that we as human beings should develop our characters in such a way that we should not expect anything other than justice and live according to that. Even if we ourselves, I just, before we started recording, I talked about kindness. And kindness, of course, means that we ourselves have to act in a way that's gracious and kind, but not necessarily to expect it for ourselves. So there's some very lovely stuff, and that's why we say Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, because they each one of them lived their lives in that sense of divine justice. I could go longer, but I don't want to spend too much more time on that. It's a whole topic. Anyway, here we are, Mishitihu. This is where Rashi is going to get into an analysis of this word, Mishitihu. Ketargumo, he says this follows the Targum, the Aramaic translation, Shechalte, Shechalte, Shechalte. Here's the word right up here if you can follow my arrow, right? And it means I drew him out. When I was looking it up in the dictionary, made him depart. In other words, made him depart from, caused him to depart from the water. So drew him out. Vahu lashon hotza'ah belashon arami. He says, and this has the connotation or the denotation of, it's a language, lashon, the language of taking out in Aramaic, belashon arami, and he gives a lovely example of an Aramaic expression, kemish mashchel, this shechalte, right? Kemish mashachel benita mechelba, like drawing a hair from milk. And incidentally, that just to give you a context of this expression, it is a description of someone who dies in their sleep, who dies without any pain, any illness, but like lives their life to the full, goes to bed, falls asleep, and doesn't wake up. That is described as their death is like taking hair out of milk. In other words, it's an easy death. So that's that expression there. My father actually, Baruch Hashem, that's exactly what happened to him essentially. He went to bed and he didn't wake up. So I think, knowing the fact that we're all mortal, I would wish that on everyone, if that's the way we got to go, rather than through suffering. So now he goes on. Uvelashon ivri, but in Hebrew, right, in Hebrew, he's just explained Aramaic, he says, Meshitihu Lashon Hasirotav. It has the meaning of, again, I removed him, okay, or he removed him. Kamo, and he gives an example, Joshua chapter 1, Lo Yamush. It will not, in other words, he's talking here about the Torah. God says to Joshua, if you never allow the Torah to depart, right? If you study it day and night, then you will succeed. Lo Mashu, they did not depart. Kach Chibru Menachem. This is how Menachem explains it. How he analyzes it. Va'ani omer, but he says he disagrees. Okay, He says, I say, Rashi says, it doesn't say I say too often, by the way. You notice Rashi very often is quoting others and quoting tradition. But he says, but I say, she'eno mimachberet mash. So it could be that he's not necessarily disagreeing with Menachem here, but he's saying in general, as he analyzes it, that it is not from the root mash. In other words, a two-letter root. In modern Hebrew, at least in modern Hebrew grammar, these roots generally are understood as ayin vav verbs. They're described as ayin vav verbs, meaning that the middle letter is a vav. But Rashi's under this is remember, grammar is developing, and he is seeing it as most Hebrew roots are triliteral. They have three letters, but there is a classification where there are only two letters. And as I said, even now, when you study grammar, you understand them as triliteral, with the vav, which of course is a very weak letter, in the middle in the middle position. Okay, vayam, vayamosh, or something like that. Vayamash. Vayimash. It's not that kind of, that's not the root, he says. Ela migzerat masha. He says, and this would be defined as a lamed hay verb. Okay, so the word in Hebrew for doing, i.e. a verb, right, is pa'al, pei ayin lamed. So if the problematic letter, so to speak, or the letter that causes an exception to the way in which a verb would normally be conjugated, it depending on where it positions. So if it's the last letter, because lamed is the last letter of the word pa'al, it would be known as a lamed hay verb, right? So this would be the pay position of the verb, this would be the ayin position of the verb, and this would be the lamed position of the verb. So in other words, he's saying that it's a lamed hey, it's not an ayin vav verb where the middle letter, the ayin of the letter is vav, but rather a lamed hey verb. Velashon hotza'ahu, and this is so. Remember, the word mush means to move, to move, to depart, right? To depart. And he says, but the root masha has the meaning of to take out, not to depart, but to remove. Who it is, it also. So you realize, of course, in terms of meaning, they're very close, right? It's somewhat subtle, the distinction between departing and removing. But he says it is the language, it has the meaning of to remove. And he gives examples. Yami Sheni. And by the way, the Yud, right? Yud and Hey and Vav, they're all, and even in fact an Aleph on occasion, they're all interchangeable depending on the particular conjugation, how it's working. That the particular form that the verb is taking. But a lamed hey verb, very often the yud comes to take the place of the hey. So Yami Sheni, he caused me to depart, Mayim Rabim, right? So in other words, rescued me from mighty waters. Um, She'ilu haya, so Rashi is supporting his argument here. She'ilu haya mimachberet mash. He says, because if this verb, in fact, was from an ayin vav root, right, the mush, right, lo yitachen lomar, this would not be, the form that the verb would take would not be meshitihu. This is what she is saying, right? This is the word, please excuse me, this is what Pharaoh's daughter says, Meshitihu, right? Meshitihu, with a shava. This is important to notice. It's getting into such detail here, right? It would not say, if it was from mush, she would not have said Meshitihu, Ella ha-mishutihu, or ha-mishutihu. She would have said it that way. And he gives examples where there are double, these ayin vav's verbs. He says, just as is stated, min come, from the root come. Remember there, kum is how we would say it nowadays. Again, an ayin vav verb, which means to get up. Hakimoti. That's how it would take. That's the way in which it would be stated, in that if it was used in the sense that Pharaoh's daughter used it. In other words, causative. I caused him to get up. Umin shav. Shav means to return, to return. Hashivoti, right? Hash, hashivoti. I returned him, or I returned, yeah, it's causative. Umin ba, in other words, she caused him to come out of the water. So it's a causative, um, con, uh, it's a causative conjugation. It's the hifil form of the verb, that particular construction. And here we keep going here. Umin ba, there's a verb, bo, beit vav aleph, ayin vav verb, havi oto. Okay, I brought him. Or it should have said, and I believe here he's saying mashitihu, not mishitihu, but mashitihu. Kamor, he says, umashti et avon haaretz, right? I I have removed, right? Not departed, but I removed the iniquity of the land. Aval mishiti, this, when it takes this particular form, Eino ela migzerat teva chafel, he's saying this form of the verb is from the construction of the, he calls it shafel, that's hifil in modern grammar, right? It's a causative form of the verb, shela, of the verb, meyusad behe, which has a hey as part of the root. Besof behe, besof teva. That's a hey at the end of the word. And he gives examples. Kagun, masha, bana, asa, tziva, pana. These are all verbs. Masha, again, to depart, right? Bana, he built, he did, he commanded, he turned. Kesheyavo lomar bahem pa'alti, right? So when you are going to use it in a way of in the causative sense, I made this happen. I made this happen. Tavo hayud, the letter yud comes bimkom hahe. It comes in the place of the hay at the end of the word. Kamo asiti. There's a common word. I did. So you see, the root is asa, but in this particular form, the hey is replaced by a yud. I did. Baniti, right? I built. Piniti, I have cleared out. Tsiviti, I commanded. So as I said, we sort of work through very carefully this grammatical analysis of the word meshitihu.
Rabbi, I just wanted to
Yes.
mention something.
Yes.
When you were talking about the word ba, and it mine says havioti,
Yes.
not, and
Okay.
yours said havioto, and
Okay.
I think your yud has just a little messy stuff under it
Got it.
that
Got
makes
it.
it look like it,
Right.
ink under it that makes it look like it's a vav, but everything else in here is a yud.
Great.
And
Thank
in
you.
mine, that's also a yud.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. See, this is where the word is. So you're right, and it could be a ghost underneath the. Again, remember this was actually printed with actual type, right? And so sometimes there are mistakes. But thank you, Lauren. That's very helpful. Thank you. I really
So,
appreciate that. Yes, David.
so maybe we're going to this next, but after all the grammatical analysis, then,
Yes.
kind of what's the conclusion associated with the difference between, depart, let's say, versus take, or,
Right.
the points he's making
Right.
about, or are we going there next? If we are, then,
No, no, no.
I'll
We
stop.
no. I think he's. I know it's not. It isn't like it's a glaring difference, right? I'm not. I have to say truthfully. So I guess the difference would be I removed him from the water, as opposed to. Let's see. I want to make sure I've got the right.
Well,
Yeah. That is what it is. Okay. In other words, as as um, as Onkelos, as opposed to I caused him to depart from the water.
well, I was wondering though, if yeah, as you were saying that, the subtlety also to me is the causative action means that a person was involved, right? So
Yes.
if he, it's almost like if we translate it as take, then it means that, Pharaoh's daughter, literally it was a human performing that action, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Basically, there's a human, or a person involved with that, right? Versus depart almost means like maybe Moses himself, was able, to get out of the water, right? He didn't actually require human assistance, right? So the difference, is almost between the divine and the not divine. It's
Mm,
just what I was
mm,
thinking,
mm.
because why else would you go on and look at this from such a detailed grammatical sense, unless
Yes.
you want to draw a conclusion around it, based on the greater, meaning of the text. So
Right.
that's what I was kind of thinking, was
Mhm.
that distinction. It would make sense, because if Moses himself were able to depart from the water without human assistance,
Right.
that puts him in the category of the divine, right? So
Mm.
anyway,
Yeah, I know.
it's just
I
a
mean,
Oh,
I
thought.
think
another
it's great
reason.
that you're wrestling with this, right? So mishitihu, in when it's mash, right? That would be to depart, whereas mishitihu with a yud and lamed hey would be remove, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, go ahead. I'm
But
sorry.
I, I'm sorry, I was just going to say that Rashi, the reason sometimes he goes on at length about something is just because neither of the answers he has are really adequate. In other words, this is a problematic word. It's hard to see really where it comes from, and he's bringing the one traditional answer, and then he's saying, "Well, that doesn't convince me, and here's mine." It does. I would rather not say that it implies that Moshe was divine, because the
Hmm.
Torah is very intent on portraying Moshe as totally human.
Hmm.
No, I didn't mean divine in the sense of him being divine himself. I meant divine intervention to enable him to, come from the water, right? He didn't require assistance from a person to do it. But I'm not talking about him being a divine presence. That was my point.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
I
see.
mean, there are a lot of events, right, that there's divine intervention that causes them to occur, right? I mean, we see that. So through, so that was my point, was the action of him coming from the water, was that something that was caused by a human, or is a human action, which you would, on first glance of reading it, that's what you would probably assume, or was it something that was actually some divine intervention that didn't actually require a human, right? It's something that God caused to happen, right? Anyway, so that was my point, because of otherwise there'd be no point in just going through this grammar that deeply. But anyway, yeah, I was not trying to imply that Moses was divine. I mean,
Okay.
that I was not trying to imply.
All right, so
So
I'm meditating on the difference between remove and cause to depart. Okay, those are basically the distinction of how you parse out this particular word. I think, Shirabith, it seems to me that sometimes Rashi, at least my sense of where Rashi is doing this, where he's actually going into the grammatical analysis of it, sometimes has to do with, Trinitarianism or something like that, that he's getting close to things that might have been mistranslated. I think that's his concern, although how this has anything to do with it, I'm not certain here, and it might be at some point I'll find out that what he was kind of obliquely referring to here. Um, but in both senses, by the way, Rashi is not trying to suggest for 1 second that it's not a causative form of the verb. In both cases, he's saying Pharaoh's daughter did it. Okay, so the question now becomes, when it says, when we understand the verb to have the connotation of that Pharaoh's daughter caused him to depart from the water, which he says is not correct, as opposed to Pharaoh's daughter removing him from the water, we'd have to try and meditate on the difference between removal and departure. What are the connotations between those two words? Is departure a little bit more final, saying nothing to do with it, as opposed to removal, which would just be for the time being sort of thing? And if and now I'm really deep, deep diving now. If we think of water as representing justice or Torah or whatever, is there some suggestion that Moses had no relationship to God's law or something like that? I mean, I myself feel that's, without any further support to to support that particular speculation. I mean, I'm just struggling to
I think we
understand
could,
why Rashi
can we
goes to
just
this
say,
trouble. Go ahead.
well, I think we could just say that he took Hebrew grammar seriously, and if he was
Yeah,
gonna,
yeah,
that if he was gonna disagree with the traditional
yes,
etymology of the word, then
yes.
he would put in the time and effort to explain himself.
True, and I agree with you. I think that, that's sort of I think that would be called an Occam's razor kind of approach. Let's go for the most obvious reason as opposed to the less obvious reasons. I could give you another piece. Look, he has a lot of respect for Menachem. If Menachem is one of his teachers and he's choosing to disagree with his teacher, he's going to be very careful as to, to try to explain why he's choosing to disagree with his teacher at this point, and that alone could be a reason for him to go into such detail and a detail analysis.
Oh yeah, I agree with that.
I
Yeah,
have a
see what I'm
comment.
saying? So, we don't need to look for deeper stuff. So I'm very, believe me, I'm a believer in Occam's razor, you know. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I
Lisa?
have a
Yeah?
comment. Yes. Um, I just had this visualization of God, uh, of Moses calling out. So God spoke through Moses
Mm,
to Miriam, to, to Pharaoh's daughter, to bring him from the water.
mm. So that sort of would go along the lines of the fact that she saw the Shekhinah when he, remember we had that commentary that says that she saw the divine presence
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's certainly
But
something to think
this is
about.
this is a little different from that too, is that God is speaking through Moses.
Well, of course, okay,
I
Moses,
mean,
of course, is
doesn't
crying.
that
That's what
happen?
he's doing. He's not
Right,
saying
but
anything, right?
right, but God speaks through Moses so
Mm,
Moses can be removed
mm,
and brought to safety. And isn't that what happened along Moses's life too? Is how God would speak through Moses.
mm. Okay.
Okay, that's it.
All right. No, no, no. Appreciate, trying to understand this better. And that
Well,
it's just one of those
there
points.
is,
We'll need to stop here. I mean, I'm happy to take any other comments, but that's where we're going to have to stop today. And well, please God, we have tomorrow. Shira Beth, I hope you'll maybe check out the recording. I know you can't join us because it's Shabbat there already. So we will move on to the next verse and get into, I think, a different approach, not so grammatical and technical. So I'm going to stop the share and then stop the recording.